All right. I should be live, and if you can hear me and see me, please let me know in the chat, and that way we can get started and talk about the topic at hand tonight, which is about, well, the drug war beginning. And it's beginning quietly, but there's a lot of things happening very quickly that you should be aware of because there's a potential for this to affect you directly. And of course, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can get out here, give you information like this, and partner with a really good company that you can get preparedness related gear and equipment from. So big thanks to Midway USA, and I'm glad to see everybody here. We have numbers coming through. 556 by 69 says Heart Gold 556. We have Cinco por Cinco from Robert P. We also have Jacob Mullins just saying yo. And you know what? Yo back to you. David Baise, 5x5, we're good to go. CS Tech even says 5x56. And Dave Sickles, good evening to you as well. And of course, yes, there is evidence that there's a potentially planned Mexican cartel attack on United States servicemen or officials or law enforcement that may or may not implicate the Mexican government, which is why the title of tonight's live stream includes the FF tag, because if you know, you know. And of course, we do have a lot of updates to this whole drug war scenario that I think is very relevant to preparedness and just something you should be aware of in general as an American. So let's get things rolling because I think it's about time. Now, first off, I want to talk about the fact that we do have some U.S. Special Forces members heading to Mexico right now in a military capacity, mostly for training. Now, I've seen this reported a couple of different ways, so I want you to just be aware of like what's reality versus what's being talked about out there, as in the idea that, like, you know, special forces are heading in there right now to start taking out drug cartels. This is more of a training mission, but this is still a little bit more advanced than what we usually see happening between the U.S. and Mexico regarding military relations. So, U.S. Special Forces landing in Mexico to train Marine infantry. And this training actually started today, so this is an ongoing effort that's occurring right this second as we talk about it. A Mexican Senate commission has approved the entry of members of the U.S. Army's 7th Special Forces Group into the country starting this week. The Americans will come fully armed as part of a mission to train the Mexican Navy's Infanteria de Marina on conventional and non-conventional types of combat. I believe that is the Green Beret group. I believe it says so in this article later on, but if I'm wrong, let me know in the chat. The training takes place from February 17th through March 30th at the Luis Carpizo Naval Facility in the state of Campeche, according to Senator Alejandro Moreno Cardenas, president of the Mexican Senate's Naval Ministry Commission. The Americans are landing in a C-130 airplane in Campeche 2 days prior to the start of the training, Moreno said. The commission unanimously approved the mission without discussion or dissent on Tuesday. The vote came at the request of President Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, the senator said. The 7th Special Forces Group, whose model is De Opreso Liber, has participated in peacekeeping operations in Panama, Peru, and Ecuador, and has been deployed to Afghanistan, also known as Green Berets. There you go. They participated in Operation Just Cause, which resulted in the January 1990 capture of a Panamanian dictator, General Manuel Noriega, wanted in the U.S. on drug charges. So, Sheinbaum and President Donald Trump earlier this month reached a deal to postpone crushing 25% tariffs on Mexican exports to the United States in exchange for Mexico stepping up its fight against drug cartels flooding America with the deadly illicit drug fentanyl. In return, the U.S. is supposed to step up its interdiction of firearms being illegally crossed into Mexico, which we will be talking about tonight quite a bit because there's some interesting information surrounding that entire situation that we are going to jump back in time a little bit about, just to kind of give you some context, and then we're going to talk about why things aren't necessarily lining up with what the official narrative is in that capacity. Mexico in the past has let in American military advisors into its territory, but always on training missions, U.S. security experts say. It's important to say the Green Berets' role is going to be just that, training, said Scott Stewart, Vice President of Intelligence for international security consultant Touchstone Global. It's not like they're sending in the SEALs, the Delta, or the Rangers. It's not like we are seeing the deployment of combat troops or combat aircraft. And that is my understanding, too. This is a training mission, but this is timing-wise, in line with a lot of actions that are currently underway. So, wanted to mention that because that training starts today. So we do have Special Forces members of our military in Mexico training their military in order to prepare for most likely what we should expect to be additional actions. Now, Law of the Minimum, thank you for the awesome work you put into this. Well, you're welcome, and thank you for supporting it because it really helps me, stay motivated to want to come out here and do these live streams and hang out with everybody because I do appreciate how supportive this community is. Exile Reviews, thanks for being here. Thank you for modding. Always appreciate you. And then we also have Silent Guard. This should be the content you lean toward when it starts popping off more. Well, we'll see what happens, but this is something that I'm trying to keep a sharp eye on because it's not being overly analyzed by other preparedness channels. So I'm trying to find my niche. I want to make sure that I'm trying to make you aware of things that are relevant and could affect us directly here in the country. But at the same time, let some of the people who might have a little bit more expertise weigh in on some of the more geopolitical things that are happening around the world and other stuff of that nature. So if I can kind of zone in on what I find to be our most likely kinetic action threat here in the States, then I'm more than willing to do that. So let's see here. Now, Mike H. says Delta Force was central to catching Noriega as well. Well, that's good to know, and that's a little bit of history that I'm not fully brushed up on. So I think I'll have to look back into that a little bit more just to have, just a broader understanding of how all of this works. Now, here we will start talking about this potential FF, right, which is the false flag acronym that I use in the sense of like titling and any descriptive terms when I try to put these packages together, because it generally is seen as like a negative connotation regarding this platform, and I just want to make sure that we get the message out where we can, but I just went ahead and said it anyway, so I guess whatever at this point. But that's what is being expected right now regarding Mexican drug cartel attacks on U.S. citizens, but from across the border. So I found this to be really interesting. And this actually came out February 13th, so not too long ago, 4 days ago now, and I just want to make sure you're aware, especially if you have people who are working in Border Patrol or have friends and family that live down on the border or in these border towns, there's a potential for things to get very bad there. So you should definitely be aware of this. We are going to talk about the northern border later tonight as well, because there's some concerning happenings coming from there as well. Okay, Texas border agents warned of major Mexican cartel attack. Border Patrol agents in Texas have been placed on high alert after a memo warned of a potential attack from the Mexican side of the border. A memo obtained by News Nation from the Rio Grande Valley Sector Operations Center warns agents in the sector about an alleged plan by an organized group based in Matamoros, Mexico, to deploy a shooter targeting U.S. law enforcement or military personnel from across the border. So I assume that means a sniper or possibly somebody using heavier weaponry, rockets of sorts, or maybe mortars, or who knows what else. I mean, sure, they have access to artillery or at least howitzers, so who knows? But this is what is being put out there as a memo to service personnel in the area, which means that there's obviously a reason for this threat to be considered likely. Let's go ahead and just read the report. It's very small print, but I can read it for you. The Rio Grande Valley Sector Operations Center received information indicating that an organized group operating out of Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, is allegedly planning to use a subject who will remain in Mexico to shoot at a U.S. government, law enforcement, or military official on the U.S. side of the border. Additional information suggests that the shooter will attempt to make it appear as though the government of Mexico were involved. No further information is available at this time. Agents are reminded to be cognizant of their surroundings while performing Border Patrol operations. It is recommended that all agents wear their ballistic armor, utilize long arms, and if possible, work in groups when responding to illicit activity along the immediate border. So, this is where the false flag statement comes from. The idea here is that for some reason they have intel telling them that the likelihood is not only that they will target possibly even a government official. We know that the new director of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has been down there on the border wearing body armor and riding horses and everything else. But at the same time, that would be a very prominent figure to target if they're talking about U.S. government officials, which just saying right here is possible, as well as law enforcement and military officials. But not only are they going to target them, but they're also going to somehow implicate the Mexican government in the attack. Now, you could look at this a couple different ways if you wanted. The Mexican government could already be considered implicated because, well, we know that there's a lot of corruption at the political level there and that the cartels already have their hands in just about everything regarding the Mexican government. So could already be intertwined regardless of how you want to look at it. But at the same time, if they are specifically staging this attack in order to make it seem like it came from the Mexican government, what would be the purpose behind that and what would be the intentional goal there, right? And I don't think that they could necessarily start a war between Mexico and the US, but it would certainly cause a lot of problems with relations, and it would certainly cause a lot of issues with any of these trade agreements and anything else going forward when it comes to targeting these cartels on Mexican soil, as well as, designating them as foreign terrorist organizations and everything else. So this is a very interesting situation that I think we should pay attention to and keep an eye out for. Now, we know that we had the recent executive order about designating these cartel organizations foreign terrorist organizations, which is going to be going through here soon, according to Marco Rubio. But Trump signed an executive order on day one, designated Mexican drug cartels and other Latin American criminal groups like the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua as terrorist organizations. Trump's order states that these groups threaten the safety of American people, the security of the United States, and the stability of international order in the Western Hemisphere, which is obviously true. The memo also indicates that the group allegedly attempted to create the illusion of U.S. government involvement in the shooting. Now, that's not true. It's the illusion of Mexican government involvement in the shooting, but I don't work for Newsweek. Somebody else does. That's not doing their job very well. Agents have been advised to wear ballistic armor and travel in groups because of the increasing likelihood of attacks. Now, I will say, and you guys can weigh in this on in the live chat if you'd like, but I'm looking at getting kind of like the everyman's gold standard AR as a project later this year, and I'm looking at the Colt 6920 as being, the standard of law enforcement, and it's just been there and been around and very reliable and, well spoken of in general and reasonably affordable in that kind of medium ground area. But Geisley just released their Border Patrol version of a AR-15, and it's very cool, and it's Border Patrol, and that's kind of like what's happening lately, right? So I don't know which one's better for dealing with cartels, right? Do you need the Border Patrol rifle from Geisley, or do you just need a Colt 6920 to get it done like it's always been doing? You guys can let me know in the chat. Now, the Rio Grande Valley Sector Operations Center received information indicating that an organized group, right, out of Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Now, that organized group is likely one of the cartels that operates in the region, obviously, but that could be from any group. We don't know exactly which cartel that's coming from, and so that's just something that they left out of the memo, which means we're just kind of not sure. But obviously, the more information they release, the less likely they are to continually get the intel that they're receiving from those sources, right? Because somebody told somebody that this was likely going to happen, which means they don't want to implicate anybody who's maybe deep inside or who knows what else, right? But regardless, all of this stuff is moving forward, and they are making plans to make it worse, at least in the sense of getting governments involved. And obviously, I don't think this is going to just suddenly stop either. So there's a good chance that they're going to try something, and if they do, the response will be very strong, right? And let's see here. We have Representative Keith Self of Texas said, I've just been made aware of this memo that apparently the cartels are going to have a shooter shoot across the border at law enforcement or military officers, trying to make it look as though the government of Mexico is involved. Look, we have President Trump in office now. President Trump will hit back hard. I recommend you do not do this, because if you remember back to the Middle East, President Trump had the third-ranking man in Iran killed because one contractor died. He will hit back hard. I recommend you don't do this. So this is what we're being told. This is what is a possibility right now. And there's nothing saying here that it has to be in any certain particular area, just across the border, right? So you assume Texas, you assume that, you're near El Paso or something like that, but this could happen anywhere. And honestly, there's places, especially across the northern border, that are even more, let's just say, lax in the sense of security, where an officer would become more of a easier target. And so it could happen wherever. I'm not sure what their plans are, but I wanted to share them with you because it could cause a lot of problems, especially if it was hard to really tell whether or not the Mexican government was involved or not. And it is going to be hard to tell because there is a lot of rampant corruption and cartel entwinement within the Mexican government. It's just the truth. It's been known for a very long time now. They're in the military, they're in the law enforcement agencies, they're in the government as well. Now, Mike H. says, the word around here is that cartels have stashes of drugs throughout the Huaca Mountains. Yes. And, or is it Huachuca? Sorry, I probably said that wrong both times. Regardless, yes, I doubt that they just have everything just in one place. Like, they have it spread all over the place. They have caches everywhere, and I have zero doubt that that's true. Let's see here. So People are saying 6920 all the way. Ernest said so, at least. Granite State, man, I applied to CBP. So happy I didn't get the job. Well, it'd be a rough time, but also a necessary job right now as well. So maybe we needed you. I don't know. But, either way, I understand where you're coming from. Trust me. Matthew Diaz says, what is a 4570? I would say it's something that bears really hate and have nightmares about. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some other stuff here regarding our relationship with Mexico based on what we just talked about, right? So we're talking about how the cartels are going to try to implicate the Mexican government, but the Mexican government's already implicated in so many ways. And I thought this was an interesting article. It actually came out today. And it's an opinion article, but there is some good stuff in here that I want you just to consider regarding our positioning with Mexico, especially the fact that they're not really an ally and that they're basically becoming a failed narco state that is attached to us via landmass that is going to only cause us more problems if something doesn't change, okay? Let's see here. We're going to start off right here. On President Donald J. Trump's first day in office, he issued an executive order designated human and drug trafficking cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This week, the other shoe is expected to drop as the State Department, under Secretary Marco Rubio, names designating 6 Mexican cartels as FTOs. And I believe they're also designating gangs and cartels from El Salvador, as well as Colombia, and obviously Venezuela. So it's going to be more than just Mexico, but the majority are coming out of Mexico. Official Washington has long peddled the comfortable fiction that Mexico is an honest partner in the fight against drugs and human trafficking. This myth persists despite decades of overwhelming evidence that the Mexican government is at best willfully negligent and at worst in active collusion with the criminal networks, destroying lives on both sides of the border, cartels that Trump just called out by name. Trump has put a forceful end to this lie. Trump's action exposes the inconvenient truth. Mexico, first under former President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador and his Morena party, and now with President Claudia Sheinbaum, is no peer ally. It is a state deeply compromised by cartel corruption and control. While Washington elites fret over diplomacy and stability, tens of thousands of Americans are dying from fentanyl poisoning every year. This crisis is directly fueled by cartels operating with impunity in Mexico with material, financial, and intelligence support from China. And now, we've talked about this previously in other live streams, but remember this as things develop throughout this year. If those organizations are considered foreign terrorist organizations, anyone who provides terrorist organizations with material support may find themselves being financially sanctioned, right? If China is providing that support, how does that look, right? And now, is this part of the broader plan, especially regarding the tariffs and everything else? Is this part of the broader economic plan regarding the fact that we are designating these groups foreign terrorist organizations? Is it not just about what they're doing, but it is also about who is supporting them, especially regarding one of our greatest foreign adversaries? So, the criminal organizations are no different from Middle Eastern terrorist groups like ISIS or Hezbollah. They are ruthless, well-funded, and wield political power in ways that no legitimate government should tolerate, unless, of course, that government is compromised. Okay? Designating cartels as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, is not a radical escalation. It is a necessary adjustment to reality. The same tools we use to fight international terrorism, financial sanctions, expanded intelligence operations, and even direct military action should be brought to bear against the Mexican cartels. The benefits of this designation are clear. Cartels and their enablers would face asset freezes, travel bans, and severe penalties for anyone providing them with material support. More importantly, U.S. law enforcement would have enhanced authority to dismantle cartel networks inside of America. This is a war, and it should be fought as one. Critics will warn that this could damage U.S.-Mexico relations, but let's be honest, what exactly are we trying to preserve? A phony partnership where the Mexican government pretends to care about stopping drug trafficking while simultaneously profiting from it? This isn't diplomacy, it's a deadly theater. Now, here's an interesting thing that people might not be aware of. Under a policy initiated by AMLO, which is the previous president of Mexico, the so-called abrazos no balazos, hugs not bullets, security policy, Mexico has formally surrendered to the cartels. AMLO himself has openly admitted that he prefers to avoid conflict with these groups, offering them olive branches while they flood America with deadly drugs and traffic human beings for profit. This is not a strategy, it's complicity. The result is a growing narco state on our southern border. The cartel's reach extends into Mexican politics, the judiciary, and even law enforcement at the federal and state levels. Mexican journalists and whistleblowers who dare to expose these connections are frequently silenced permanently. So, this is very true in many ways. Mexico has a lot of problems with corruption and cartel influence and power over their political figures. So, now we're going to get started on how that's been recently denied by the Mexican government and how they're going after firearms manufacturers here in our country, and how there's an interesting twist and turn about how the cartels are just suddenly getting all of this military hardware, which of course it's not sudden. They've been getting stuff like that since the 1980s, but it's also telling based on current time, right? Time and context is everything. So, hugs, not bullets. LOL, says Mike H. Yes, exactly. Yeah, what a great policy against the worst criminals on the planet in the sense of what they're willing to do to human beings. Let's see here. XA Agrifa, we may have to have a draft so people are prepared in basic defense of the nation. Well, you know what? I'm not sure about all that, but I am glad that, we have a good volunteer force right now that recruiting numbers are actually up for. So we might be in a good spot currently, but I do agree, maybe a civil defense program would be more in order, right? A program where we do have some level of subsidization from the government to support training programs and organized groups within communities that could respond to a crisis without having to be forcefully put into military positions or into a boot camp scenario, right? And we used to have a better civil defense program back during the Cold War, but of course it was dismantled because, it was expensive. And we obviously had, drag shows in Nicaragua to finance, so we couldn't afford to do it anymore. So now we're just going to have to figure it out on our own. Now, there are some great programs that we can currently do in our communities regarding search and rescue and things of that nature. Like CERT is a great program for that, but it's not at the level that you're alluding to. So I agree. I think there's definitely a need for something that's more openly available to the public that would be beneficial for us to have on a community level, that would be actually worth subsidization rather than a lot of these programs that don't need to be subsidized. So, yeah, it's not, CERT isn't necessarily civil defense anymore, though, Florida Sheepdog, just because CERT is very limited in capacity and comparison when it comes to anything related to actual defense of a community or defense of the nation. It's much more limited, and that's more of an emergency response in the sense of natural disasters and things of that nature. So, but I agree with you, that's kind of what we had replaced civil defense with. So, let's go ahead and go over here. Einstein says, drugs are a natural right. Well, there's a degree, though. I mean, if something is going to immediately kill a lot of people nearby, and you aren't necessarily wanting to indulge, but you're forced to just from proximity, then that becomes a different situation now, doesn't it? I do think that there should be a lot more legalization of certain activities based on the fact that I just don't want the federal government or my state government involved in my personal decisions. But there are things at a certain level that endanger a community to a degree where maybe they're not necessarily required, right? And then we also have somebody just asked about the frozen tundra of North Dakota. James asked about it, saw it was negative 43 degrees on the news. Well, I can tell you right now, as I'm sitting, it's negative 29 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill factor of making it feel like about negative 50. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to walking the dogs in the morning. So that should be a great time. Now, what's up, G-Ball Vision? Good to see you. Let's go ahead and move on to what they're trying to do in order to retaliate against this foreign terrorist organization situation. Here's the thing. If the cartels are embedded in the Mexican government, which personally my belief is they certainly are, and they want to try to retaliate to some degree, right? So this is one of their options, right? Push legal warfare or lawfare into position in order to just create barriers or create roadblocks for more of this to happen, right? And obviously this is going to tick off a lot of Americans, so it has its benefit of being chaotic and destabilizing in many ways. But this is what they're trying to push, but I find this interesting because as we go through more of this conversation tonight, you're going to see that them trying to stop, U.S. gun manufacturers as well as gun stores from being able to get guns across the border doesn't really line up with what they're actually mad about or concerned about, and doesn't really line up with what we're being told regarding the possibility of black market acquisitions of certain arms that may or may not have been delivered to another country that we may or may not support, that might not be part of NATO, but could be part of NATO at some point in time, depending on how things kind of turn out. But let's go ahead and go through it. Mexico threatens U.S. gun makers with fresh legal action. Okay, the Latin American nation, which is under mounting pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump to curb illegal drug smuggling, wants its neighbor to crack down on firearms trafficking in the other direction. If they declare these criminal groups as terrorists, then we'll have to expand our U.S. lawsuit, President Claudia Sheinbaum said at a daily press conference. A new charge could include alleged complicity of gun makers with terror groups, she said. The lawyers are looking into it, but they could be accomplices, Sheinbaum warned. She said the U.S. Justice Department itself has recognized that 74% of the weapons used by criminal groups in Mexico come from north of the border. On Thursday, the New York Times reported that the U.S. State Department plans to classify criminal groups from Mexico, Colombia, El Salvador, and Venezuela as terrorist organizations. They include Mexico's two main drug trafficking organizations, the Jalisco New Generation and Sinaloa Cartels, the report said. Okay, now we talk about the whole deal. All right. Mexico says that between 200,000 and 750,000 weapons manufactured by U.S. gun makers are smuggled across the border from the United States every year, many of which are found at crime scenes. Now, just a reminder, I'm just going to throw this out there because I know everybody in this chat is intelligent and very capable of grasping basic concepts because, well, generally that's all I can provide. But regardless, smuggling is the illegal part here, by the way. The firearms manufacturers are not purposely trying to have their firearms smuggled. Now, I mean, maybe some of them are, I don't know, but generally I would assume they're not. And smuggling is an illegal activity, a crime that how are you supposed to be held liable for, right? But here they're trying to say that that's the problem, and I just find it very interesting. Last August, a U.S. judge dismissed a $10 billion lawsuit brought by the Mexican government against 6 gun manufacturers based in the United States that sought to hold them responsible for deaths from guns trafficked into Mexico. Which is funny because they're being trafficked by their people, the cartels, who probably have people in their government that, make it so the cartels can operate with impunity. But regardless, the suit was thrown out based on a lack of jurisdiction, though Mexico said at the time that its lawsuit against 2 manufacturers, Smith & Wesson and Interstate Arms, would continue. Another suit brought into the border state of Arizona seeks sanctions against dealers that sold guns which were used in serious crimes over the border. Mexico tightly controls firearm sales, making them practically impossible to obtain illegally. Now, here's the interesting part. If those guns weren't illegal, would the need exist for them to be trafficked from up north? Would the cartels be able to be profitable by trafficking the firearms across the border? Would the cartels have as much power and sway over the population of Mexico if the average Mexican citizen could walk into a gun shop and buy a gun? So all these things have to be brought into question, which goes back to what we were just saying a little bit earlier, like regarding how, drugs shouldn't necessarily be illegal. I believe Einstein brought that up. But the idea there is of course, yes, that's also part of the situation. Making something illegal makes it more valuable. So this is one of those scenarios where obviously maybe that was a mistake, Mexico. I don't know, but here we are. Now, earlier this month, Sheinbaum angrily rejected an accusation by the United States that her government has an alliance with drug cartels. We categorically reject the slander made by the White House against the Mexican government about alliances with criminal organizations, the president wrote on social platform X at the time. If there is such an alliance anywhere, it is in the U.S. gun shops that sell high-powered weapons to these criminal groups. Now, here's something I want you to keep in mind as we move forward. They are talking about the high-powered weapons sold in gun shops. Right? They're talking about manufacturers like Smith & Wesson, okay? Interstate Arms, all these other manufacturers they're trying to sue. This is what they're trying to say is their big concern. But as we go through the rest of this conversation, suddenly we're not talking about a semi-automatic AR-15 being the main problem anymore. We're not talking about somebody's deer rifle being the problem anymore, or your high-point yeet cannon being the issue. We suddenly are talking about belt feds and rocket launchers and everything else. And personally, I just can't really buy those things at my local gun shop unless I, applied for some special arrangements where I would be able to have a fully automatic weapon or something that may be able to explode, right? But that takes a lot of paperwork and time. And at that point, whose fault would that actually be? Well, that would be us being unable to vet the people who are applying for those things, which I don't necessarily think they should have to apply for based on just the Second Amendment in general. But that's what we currently live under. So whose fault would that be at that point? Just so everybody knows. A while ago, somebody mentioned when I was drinking coffee that I was sipping. I was making like a sipping sound, right? Like, you know what I mean, the sipping sound. So I try really hard to not do that anymore because I could see that being a little off-putting, and I do actually take feedback. So I appreciate people trying to help me be more acceptable, I guess, right? So we are going to talk about a recent little kerfuffle that started because of Tucker Carlson regarding the possibility of Mexican cartels acquiring weaponry, from an Eastern European nation. Now, this was debunked, and everybody came out simultaneously, basically saying it was false, right? Our Department of Defense came out against it. Ukraine came out against it. Everybody came out against it. But then you start looking a little bit further into it, and it's a little more interesting than just saying, no, he's wrong. And especially with everything that's happening right now. I mean, we just heard from the Mexican president that they're really upset about arms coming from the United States being used by cartels and that they have to sue our firearms manufacturers because of it. But then this is an impossibility somehow. So let's look into that a little bit further. Silent Guard says they are working on making full auto constitutional legal. Well, that would be interesting, but I will just wait and see how that goes. And in all honesty, regardless of legality, it's one of those things where, like, if you don't need it, that's fine, but it shouldn't be hard for you to access if you did decide you wanted it, right? Like, these are just the things that we should all be able to obviously agree upon, in my opinion, because if criminals are just going to put Glock switches on their Glocks and show them off on TikTok regardless and just go do whatever they want on the weekend, then what's really the difference of somebody who doesn't have any ill intention owning the same thing that is technically already constitutionally protected? But what do I know? So, good evening to you, South Florida, aka Doug. Good to see you. MP, I don't care how you drink your coffee. Geez. Well, I appreciate that. But you know what? I think that there's always room to take a little bit of criticism, right? Because I can always improve. So let's talk about this whole black market Ukrainian Mexican drug cartel situation. And then we're going to talk about it in a back in time context. And speaking of back in time, if you're here on Replay Crew, make sure you check in. I always appreciate you guys coming back to watch these live streams after the fact. I know they're late for some of you and you have work and you have jobs to get to, and I totally respect that. So thank you for coming back and listening anyways. And make sure you check in the comments because I appreciate saying hello to you. And then at the same time, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, because that will actually give you notifications that these live streams are happening, which is basically every Monday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So this is a story that just came out last week, and I thought it was interesting. American far-right pro-Russian political commentator. Not my words, just this is the article, right? And this is from United 24 Media, so I'm just reminding you that I didn't say that. I'm just reading the article. Tucker Carlson claimed on his show that Ukraine is selling 50% of the weapons provided by the U.S. to Mexican cartels. According to Carlson, this is not just a speculation, but a fact, further alleging that American intelligence agencies are fully aware of it and profiting from it. That's never happened before, right? Carlson could not provide any evidence to support his claim, stating, "Can't prove that, but I believe it." Ukraine Center for Countering Disinformation, definitely not totalitarian in any shape or form, part of the National Security and Defense Council, refuted Carlson's claim in a statement on Telegram. This is an old fake that Russian sources have been spreading since 2022, which we're going to talk about, which the center previously debunked in its analytical report, The Black Market Weapons, the statement read. The CCD pointed out, by the way, this is from the country that's being accused of selling this weaponry, so just keep that in mind. The CCD pointed out that on August 1st, 2022, Russian media and Telegram channels citing Mexico's Milenio Television falsely reported that Ukrainian weapons have been sold to the Golfo drug cartel. The report mentions dozens of American M136 grenade launchers, AK-47 rifles, and Javelin anti-tank systems that the U.S. supplied to Ukraine. According to the Mexican channel, Javelins can supposedly be found on the black market, where their price ranges from $20,000 to $60,000. The report's host made an error, mistakenly referring to the M136 AT-4 grenade launcher as a Javelin. The AT-4 grenade launcher has been in mass production since the 1980s, with over 600,000 units manufactured to date. The cost of such a grenade launcher is $1,500 to $2,000, and it was purchased on the North American black market, not supplied from Europe or Ukraine, the CCD clarified. Because it was purchased in the North American black market, which could clearly be verified, because that's easier to verify than the Eastern European or the Mexican black market. So just letting you know, it was from that black market, not the other black. How do we know that? Because we have receipts, and they used a credit card, and we tracked the transaction, and actually they used a PayPal account. It was super easy to find. The center also emphasized that all arms deliveries and usage are strictly monitored by international partners. According to CCD experts, the spread of such disinformation aims to discredit Ukraine on the global stage. Now, I don't necessarily think this is to per se discredit Ukraine. I think that any country in a wartime scenario is going to have to deal with certain factions dealing in corruption and things of that nature, because of the fact that you're not in control of every single person and every single decision maker and every single logistical system in your country all at once, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During war, things get lost, misplaced. There's a fog of war scenario. A lot of things can occur, and things just go missing. I think we all know that for a fact, watching what we did in Afghanistan for 20 years, right? So like this stuff just happens. It's just part of the situation, unfortunately. Not to mention, look at all the weapons that Russia left behind in Afghanistan that made their way onto the black market. So this is something that just occurs. I think that the intention here was more about the fact that the Mexican cartels have access to this type of weaponry, and that should concern us because we're about to enter this active hot war with them in many ways. But as you can see, people are very upset about this whole thing, and they talked about this article from Milenio Televisión in 2022. So here's when we're going to go back in time for a second, okay? Archangel says AT-4 is an 84 millimeter anti-tank rocket, okay? Good to know. I'm not informed on this. I just read the article, right? And even Airborne Veteran Random Stuff says the AT-4 is not a grenade launcher, right? So it's good to know. Now, we'll go ahead and move on, because the AP decided to come out and actually verify that situation, or I guess not verify it, and say that this video was wrong because this mistranslation and a news report out of Mexico was the actual problem. Now, I find this to be very interesting too, because why is everyone so concerned about that? Like, why did the AP feel it's so necessary to go fact check that Mexican news broadcast about these weapons, right? Which this story is from June 2nd, 2023. So this is like almost a year after that initial story even dropped, right? So this is a very weird thing that everyone was really concerned about. But let's just talk about it for a second, because I find this to be interesting. Mistranslated news report sparks baseless claim about Mexican cartel getting weapon from Ukraine. Claim: a Mexican news outlet reported that a member of a local organized crime group was pictured with a U.S.-made Javelin anti-tank guided missile that had been trafficked from Ukraine to cartels. AP's assessment: false. A video shows a news anchor claiming in Spanish that a cartel member had been filmed with a Javelin, but she only noted that such weapons have also been used in Ukraine, not that it originated there. Additionally, the anchor misidentified the weapon, which is an AT-4, another anti-tank weapon. While AT-4s are being used in Ukraine, experts say there's nothing to indicate that the one in the video came from there, and that it's far more likely to have come from other black market channels, which I guess, I mean, to me, black market's just black market. So it's really easy to deflect that and just say, well, it probably came from that other black market. Well, okay, yeah, that's totally fine, right? The facts: social media users are sharing a Spanish language clip from Milenio, a Mexico TV network, to suggest that weapons sent by the U.S. to Ukraine have made their way into the hands of the Mexican cartel members. Like I said, this story is from June of 2023, and the original release of that news report was 2022, and Tucker Carlson's whole thing just happened. So why are we going down this road? Well, let's talk about it, okay? Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and show you a little clip of that video. No, unfortunately, no sound, because otherwise that could cause problems. But as you can see, this is where the clip comes from, and then they talked about this is a Javelin, when in reality it's an AT-4, which I think is pretty verified at this point in time. But regardless, this is where everybody was, freaking out about, was this video clip here of this guy having those weapons and everything else, okay? Now, I was like, all right, so, do I think that some of those weapons might have ended up in the black market and made their way to the cartels? Like, sure, why not? They have a foothold in Europe too, by the way. It's not just in the U.S. and not just in Mexico. So why wouldn't I believe that if they had access to it, they would take it? It's just part of their MO. But at the same time, the initial pushback on what Tucker Carlson said was very strong. It was referencing these old stories. And so I thought, okay, we have this claim from somebody who has sources and has journalistic, education and intelligence. So you'd think they'd find a way to at least get some verifiable information regarding that, or have a reason for why they have this opinion to begin with. And then you also have the Mexican government suddenly saying that the big problem is these gun manufacturers in the U.S. and pushing back on them because of all of the guns coming across the northern border into their country that the cartels are using. But then the actual investigations that they're concerned about don't line up with that at all. And one of the reasons why we're going through this isn't just to demonstrate that there's a real systemic issue in Mexico regarding the government and the cartels working together and running defense for each other when it comes to these, media, publicity, whatever you want to call them, stunts or just blitzes. But here's something I also want you to keep in mind. I'm just reminding you and letting you know from a preparedness standpoint that this is the level of equipment they have access to. And this is the groups that we're currently about to kick the proverbial hornet's nest of. So we have to be ready for this, okay? I'm not saying that this is going to end up being an all-out war type scenario on American streets, which, let's see here, the poll says 78% of people think it might spill over onto, which, especially in some of these border states, I think is a possibility. But this just goes to show that there's also probably more to it about why the government, the DOD, why Ukraine, and why all these places are just immediately putting a full stop to this, saying, no, we have accounting, we have records, and we know it's not true. Especially when we are being told on a daily basis at this point in time that there is rampant corruption and rampant waste and misspending of taxpayer dollars occurring almost every single day, including, I think, today a report coming out about, $1.7 trillion, or was it $4.7 trillion in untraceable payments made by the U.S. Treasury that we just don't have any idea what they even went to. So, there's a lot of questions and skepticism to be had. Lefty GR, thank you so much. Been a bit since I've been able to watch the Monday Talk. Thanks for your continued help, support to the masses. MP, keep up the good fight, brother. Well, thank you, and thanks for being a member for so long, Lefty. I really appreciate you. That's really amazing. So, let's talk about it. All of what we just talked about, right? I just showed you. They're mad about our guns, our Smith & Wesson M&P 15 sports, the ones that are semi-automatic and whatnot. And then they're mad saying that, there's no way these guns are coming from Ukraine. And Ukraine's saying that's not possible. And then we got to shut down the gun stores because, that's where all this is happening from. Okay, but here's what they said. And this is what they are saying. And this is from January of 2024. So a year ago, basically a year ago. So after those reports, after all that stuff, a year ago, this is what they're telling us, and this is why it's all BS, and that I think there might be some validity here, but you can let me know your thoughts in the comments. Mexico demands investigation into U.S. military-grade weapons being used by drug cartels, January 22nd, 2024. Mexico wants an urgent investigation into how U.S. military-grade weapons are increasingly being found in the hands of Mexican drug cartels, Mexico's top diplomat said Monday. Timing and context, remember, this matters. This is from January 2024. What had been going on previously for 2 years at that point in time? What are some of these claims that are coming out about how the cartels are getting these weapons, and where are a lot of these weapons more easily accessible? I'm just throwing it out there as something to consider. Mexico's army is finding belt-fed machine guns, rocket launchers, and grenades that are not sold for civilian use in the United States. That line right there tells you everything you need to know. Why are they going after our gun stores and our gun manufacturers when they're finding belt feds, rocket launchers, and grenades, right? I can't buy that stuff at my gun shop. Smith & Wesson's not selling that to me, right? Where is this coming from? The Mexican Defense Department has warned the United States about weapons entering Mexico that are for the exclusive use of the U.S. Army. Foreign Relations Secretary Alicia Bárcena said, "It is very urgent that an investigation into this be carried out." The Mexican Army said in June that it has seized 221 fully automatic machine guns, 56 grenade launchers, and a dozen rocket launchers from drug cartels since late 2018. The military-grade U.S. weaponry, which cartels have bragged about, and yes, this has been happening since 2018, but keep in mind, they said over the last 2 years, and increasingly being found in their hands. The military-grade U.S. weaponry, which cartels have bragged about and openly displayed on social media, possesses a special challenge for Mexico's army, which along with police and National Guard already faces cartels operating homemade armored vehicles and bomb-dropping drones. In June, Defense Secretary Luis Crescencio Sandoval, said 5 rocket launchers had been found in the possession of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. 4 were seized from the rival Sinaloa cartel, and 3 more seized from other cartels. Sandoval did not specifically say the weapons were from U.S. military stockpiles. Ken Salazar, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, confirmed Monday that Mexican officials had brought up the issue at meetings last week. And while he had not been aware of the problem, he pledged the United States would look into it. We're going to look into it. We're committed to working with Sedena, Mexico's Defense Department, to see what's going on, Salazar said. Remember, this is from a year ago. This is not currently the administration that we have right now. There are a number of possible routes by which weapons may have made their way to Mexico. Central America was awash with U.S. weaponry during the conflicts of the 1980s. Military-grade weapons sometimes go missing from stocks in the United States, and some manufacturers who sell arms to the U.S. military might also have sold some abroad or on the black market. We're back to that again. While the Mexican Army and Marines still have superior firepower, the drug cartel's weaponry often now outclasses other branches of Mexican law enforcement. And let's just do that one more time. Just one more quick time here. Let's see here. There are a number of possible routes by which the weapons may have made their way to Mexico. Central America was awash with U.S. weaponry during the conflicts of the 1980s. Military-grade weapons sometimes go missing from stocks in the United States, and some manufacturers who sell arms to the U.S. military might also have sold some abroad or on the black market. Okay. Now, Mexico has long had a problem with semi-automatic rifles that are permitted for civilian use in the United States being smuggled into Mexico, where only low-caliber firearms are permitted and strictly regulated. Mexico has launched legal actions against U.S. armed manufacturers and gun shops, arguing they contribute to the violence. But that's not belt feds, grenade launchers, and hand grenades. Sorry to say, but that's just not the way it is. Okay. Also Monday, describing talks last week with U.S. officials, Barcena said the United States is planning to announce sanctions against airlines and transportation companies that move migrants to South and Central America through Mexico to the U.S. border. This is all prior to this new administration. Keep that in mind. But I found this to be interesting because all of this discussion surrounding where these weapons came from and everything else, and then they're going to go ahead and turn around, a year ago, talking about military-grade weapons, not the weapons you buy at your gun shop. And then they're going to say that there's a chance they probably came from the black market. So I find it very interesting. I also find it very eye-opening. But the big takeaway for the average prepared citizen here, regardless of origin, because I'm not trying to make anybody, prove anyone right or prove anyone wrong per se, but regardless of origin, what's being used on the battlefield in Ukraine right now, as well as what's being used on the Mexican border right now, as well as what we know these cartels have access to, is a possibility to encounter here in the United States. They have RPGs, they have grenades, they have belt feds, right? And that already outclasses what the average civilian has access to. And they're organized, and they have teams, and they have members, they have groups of people, large numbers, right, that most of us don't have when it comes to our community or our friend group or our mutual assistance group, right? We don't have the numbers, we don't have the firepower, we don't have the organization. So I just want everyone to be reminded of that, because there's a lot of people that are clamoring for an opportunity to get involved with dismantling some of these, cartel organizations, which I understand, and I'm not necessarily against, because if that's your calling and you're waiting on that, then I understand. But what I'm trying to say is that be aware and prepared of the fact that these people have more than you, and it is an uphill battle in the sense of being a prepared citizen. Now, when it comes to the U.S. military, they don't have a chance. In most circumstances, they don't have a chance. But you're not the U.S. military, and neither am I. So, we have to remember that as civilians, you have to be careful about what you want to get yourself involved with, or you have to be careful about what's happening in your immediate area based on the fact that these people are well armed, well prepared, and well organized. Okay? So, just a reminder. Okay? Yeah, Jay Abrams says letters of marque. Exactly. I know people are clamoring for that. I get that. But what I'm trying to just remind you of is that this is not just your typical crack house on the corner of the bad neighborhood. These are people that have real heavy equipment and actually use it in the bad way. So they're used to doing that to other people. And that's not something that the majority of us have any experience with or exposure to. So now there is still more cartel activity occurring that I want to just touch on to remind you of what's happening in our country, but also what's happening, especially on the northern border as well. The northern border is very insecure, very large, and Canada, as much as they've claimed to try to like get stuff under control and that they shouldn't be targeted through sanctions or whatever else is happening, tariffs and everything, right? Like I get it. But this stuff is happening, so like we at least should pay attention to it, regardless of what the political class decides to do against each other. As civilians, like we just have to be aware of the fact that like this is a very porous and unsecure border. I live in a border state. I live in North Dakota. So I know the northern border of North Dakota, there's not a lot of border patrol. Like there is, and I see them every so often, but like they're not like every half a mile, right? Like, so there's a lot of open border that people could cross through. And that is happening. And they're using TikTok in order to organize it, okay? Illegal smuggling coyotes now advertising at Canada border amid Trump migrant crackdown. They're moving to the northern border because the southern border has become more secure. So just be aware of that if you're in a northern border state, which many of you I'm sure are, because a lot can happen up there as well with way less backup. Canadian traffickers are advertising an alleged human smuggling operation for illegals looking to enter the U.S. across the northern border openly on TikTok, according to a new report. CAD to USA reads a screenshot of a message from user @helper4731. DM me. The account and several others like it were no longer accessible Monday. The legitimacy of the advertisements could not immediately be confirmed, but TikTok told Fox News Digital the videos had been removed because they violate the platform's community standards, which prohibit content that promotes any form of human smuggling. The danger is they're going to go where we're not. Representative Ryan Zinke, a Montana Republican and chairman of the Northern Border Security Caucus, told Fox News. The northern border has had hundreds of crossings from people on the terrorist watch list, which is true. More KSTs come through the northern border than the southern border. Driving east, and you can see this is actually the screenshot right here, okay? So these are people who are advertising, you know, your way in, that you just got to pay. Driving east to west along the border in Montana alone takes 10 hours, he said, and most of the territory is unprotected. There's a lot of border and a lot of distance between officers, which is 100% accurate, and I see it here in North Dakota consistently. The New York Post uncovered at least half a dozen northern coyote advertisers, primarily targeting illegals from India, who are often wealthier than South American migrants. The accounts allegedly advertise safe, same-day crossings for $4,000 or more. Of nearly 1.8 million single adults from India encountered by Border Patrol agents last year, just over 150,000 of them came into the U.S. from Canada, according to government data. Did you know those numbers were that large? 1.8 million single adults from India were encountered by Border Patrol last year? That's a lot. That is a lot. And here you have a picture of guys meeting up at a gas station, getting through the border from Montreal. Representative Nicole Maliotakis, a New York Republican, is calling on the Justice Department to investigate TikTok and other apps linked to the trafficking. While the vast majority of illegal crossings happen at the southern border, officials have been warning for years that the northern line has seen an increase. TikTok, the Chinese-owned app, has been used by illegal immigrants and coyotes to generate revenue for years, right? So this is something that I just wanted to make you aware of. Now, I also have some evidence and we'll call them reminders of crimes being committed in some of these more northern states to just remind you that this stuff is happening everywhere in the country, and it is happening in the north, and it's also happening in states that don't actually share the northern border. Rocket says, but we are armed. And you know what? Like, we are, but we also have to remember that the drug cartels aren't just armed, they're well-financed. And in fact, I can demonstrate that here for you here in just a second. But first, I also want to mention that we have to be concerned about our own. What do I mean by that? Well, just like Mexico has some problems, we have problems of our own in the sense of compromised law enforcement officers and things of that nature, because there's a lot of them. Texas CBP officer arrested for human smuggling was allegedly moonlighting as member of Mexican drug cartel. Okay, so this is a story from today. A U.S. Customs and Border Patrol or Border Protection officer accused of smuggling migrants across the El Paso border was allegedly moonlighting as a member of a Mexican drug cartel, according to a federal agent's testimony. CBP officer Manuel Perez Jr., a 32-year-old U.S. citizen originally from California, is allegedly a member of the La Linea, most commonly known as the Juarez drug cartel, investigators said during his arraignment hearing last Thursday. Multiple witnesses said he belonged to La Linea cartel in Mexico. A special agent with the CBP Office of Professional Responsibility testified at the hearing, as reported by the El Paso Times. Perez was fired on February 8th after he was arrested by the FBI El Paso West Texas Border Corruption Task Force on federal and human drug smuggling charges. Okay, so like we have guys in our system right now who are working for the cartels. So we have to remember that too. It's not just Mexico that has these infiltrations and these corruption issues. Now, do we have it in a more limited capacity here in the United States? Most likely. But I do think that we have people, even on Capitol Hill, that are compromised by these Mexican drug cartels. And it's not hard for them to do. It's usually through extortion or blackmail or threats, right? So, and let's be honest, it's hard because let's say you're just your average American, law-abiding, you've worked your way up to Congress or whatever it is, and you're just trying to serve and be a good person, right? One of the very few politicians who matches that labeling. And then a drug cartel gets a hold of you and says, if you don't do this thing we need you to do, we will just destroy your entire family. And then you have to wonder if it's worth dealing with, witness protection and always living in fear and running and hiding and trying to protect your family and everything else, or if you have to just capitulate because dealing with that is not beneficial for your family. And of course, every true-blooded American wants to say, well, you have to do what's best and what's right, and I agree with that, but I understand why some people decide they have to figure out something else, and then next thing you know, corruption, right? So here we are. Now, Mike H. agreed. As an individual, I want no direct contact because they are monsters. However, against our military, they will be crushed. And that's my opinion as well. And I'm willing to support law enforcement or military officials or anybody in the area who's trying to keep us safe, right? But at the same time, I would not personally want to get directly involved because of what these people are capable of and what they're willing to do. Okay, let's see here. Uriel Udes Martinez says, we are not nearly organized enough. Yeah, and that's part of the problem. It's hard to be organized because everybody's busy and life is hard, and we all have things that we have to take care of that are more immediate than this possible issue of a drug cartel deciding to, take over your local McDonald's, right? Like these are things like we have these existential issues that we pay attention to because it could be a concern and it could eventually lead into something more dangerous, but at the same time, like we have to be realistic about our priorities in our daily lives, right? And that's just what's hard. So now let's get back to what I wanted to talk to you about when it came to, some of these issues regarding things happening within our states, okay? So this is from Toledo, Ohio. I found this case to be very interesting. This is cartel related, at least in my opinion. I mean, it has all the call signs, all right? But the other thing that's interesting here is that these people were also likely, I can't verify this, but just keep in mind, we do have a lot of refugee programs and everything else too in this country that have moved a lot of people from a lot of interesting places all over the country that somehow align themselves with some of these facets. So what do I mean, okay? So drug bust in Toledo nets fentanyl, guns, and money. Now, this is kind of like a call sign, and this should be a red flag for you. And the reason I brought this story up is because I want you to, if you look at stories like this, you need to start looking at them through the vein of this isn't just some criminal, a one-off criminal or his family that, got caught doing something dumb and now they're arrested, right? There's always more to this because these things don't happen on their own. These guys aren't running a fentanyl lab in their basement. Like this stuff is being provided to them via a network. And obviously there's more than just, your typical, corner house drug dealer shenanigans happening here. And this red flag raised for me, which is why I'm sharing it with you, to give you at least some direction or a concept to keep in mind when you're exploring some of this stuff that's happening around the country or hearing about it in your local community. There's more to this than just, the face value. So a drug bust in Toledo yielded guns, fentanyl, and thousands in cash. Following the bust, Toledo police charged Mustafa, Muhammad, and Ahmed Zatouni this week with drug crimes. On Tuesday, police executed a search warrant on a home on Secker Road. According to a search warrant, police seized more than $58,000 in cash, approximately 2 kilograms of fentanyl in a safe, along with digital scales and guns. Okay, you know what? Let me check something real quick. I want to check something. Let's see. See if I can get a number on this. Probably going to be put on a list now because I wanted to find out how much 2 kilograms of fentanyl would be worth, because I actually don't know the answer to that, and I thought that would be an interesting thing to just bring up. But obviously now now I've been put on a list about, this guy's searching how much it's worth. He's probably trying to figure out, how much he can make. So So my understanding, thanks to unfortunately AI, which was going to be the fastest way for me to get this information, 2 kilograms of fentanyl could be worth between $2 million and $10 million on the black market. Okay, cool. That's just what AI said. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Not to mention the $58,000 in cash. Okay. And they had guns and stuff too, which, like, I mean, it's America, but I don't know these people's status, so I don't know how that works, but let's go ahead and take a look here. We work with clients that are in their teens all the way to senior citizen population, said Lieutenant Steve Rogers. He says thousands of deaths are brought on by the drug trade that happen every year. The consequences spread out to theft, other crimes that are committed by people that are battling some type of substance abuse disorder to feed their addiction. Toledo police declined to talk about this case and what they found in the stash house. Why? I don't know. 13 Action News found court records that show police discovered 40 marijuana plants growing in this unattached garage. According to the court documents, Toledo police also found at least 3 cars that were re-tagged with fraudulent VIN in an attempt to conceal the identity of the vehicles. Police said the cars and truck were stolen. The more we get off the streets, the better our community is going to be. So here's the thing. We have $2 to $10 million worth of fentanyl. We have $58,000 in cash. We have weapons, guns, and everything else included. And we also have stolen vehicles where fraudulent paperwork was created, fraudulent titles were made to mask the fact that these were stolen vehicles. This is an operation. Like, this isn't just some guy who hangs out at the 7-Eleven trying to, sell drugs to addicts. Like, these guys are well funded and operating and have access to large sums of this drug. Now, here's the other thing. None of them are even in jail right now. None of the suspects are in jail. Mustafa and Muhammad Zaitouni were released on an SOR bond. They did not have to post any money as long as they show up for court. How does that work? So, as long as you show up, you don't have to post any money. Well, okay, I promise I'll show up, right? Okay, I guess that's how that works. Ahmed Zaitouni posted a $50,000 bond and was released. Now, that bond was, what's it called? A surety bond or something like that? I've never been in jail, so I don't know what all these, verbiages are, but I think it's a surety. But regardless, that means that bond might have only cost somebody like $250 to $5,000, right? In order to post the bond enough to get them out. But interestingly enough, I looked up some more information on this case just because I found it to be interesting. There's a lot of money and a lot of product here and a lot of red flags for me. Stolen vehicles from Alabama with new titles and everything else. If this doesn't scream cartel related to you, then it should. So that's why I'm demonstrating this, because you should be opening your eyes to what's actually going on with these crimes, especially if they're in your community. And this is in Toledo, Ohio. This is not in Arizona. This is not in Texas, right? This is in Ohio, in Toledo. The other thing that's interesting is that, who knows if there's any connection here at all or not. I'm just going to throw this out here. But the person who posted the bond was someone named Emily Mendoza. Okay, so all I'm saying is this has cartel written all over it. That much fentanyl doesn't go into someone's hands unless the cartel's involved. I mean, that's just where we're at this point. Okay, so please keep that in mind as we move forward. You're never going to get the full story on your own. You have to build a database of red flags and evidential breadcrumbs that you can compile to say, okay, this is most likely involving one of these organizations, which means now I know they're in my area and they're operating here. And like I said, all 3 of those men are already out of jail. Doesn't mean they're not going to go to further, prison time or anything like that if they show up to court, if they actually show up. But they're not there anymore. So now, I also want to bring up another cartel-related crime, which is actually being reported as directly cartel-related in St. Paul, Minnesota. Okay, a 4th person was charged in a cartel-related kidnapping in St. Paul, Minnesota. Another northern state, right? Another northern border state. And this is cartel related. So it's a good reminder not only that this is happening everywhere, but it's also a reminder that these are the types of crimes you can anticipate. A 4th person has been charged in connection with a drug cartel related kidnapping in St. Paul. According to court records, 45-year-old Timothy Dwayne Ripley of Maple Grove is charged with 1 count of kidnapping for a reward and kidnapping to commit great bodily harm. Yes, that's what they were going to do. Erling Soren Holdal, Kendra Sue Johnson, and Richard Sanchez Mujica were each charged with 2 counts of felonious kidnapping on January 10th in connection with the incident. According to the criminal complaint, Mujica had a warrant out for his arrest since August of 2024 after he failed to appear in court for DWI charges. I can't believe he wouldn't just go to court when he was supposed to. In December, a confidential source informed law enforcement that Mujica was involved with drug trafficking. Police say they executed a search warrant to track Mujica's phone and put out a warrant for his arrest on January 6th. On January 7th, law enforcement learned that a cooperating defendant working with a Mexican drug trafficking organization received information from their contact in Mexico that someone in the organization had killed a person named Barney who owed the organization money. The defendant said to police that the drug trafficking organization had learned Barney had not been killed yet and was asking for help in torturing and killing him. Charging documents say the contact in Mexico then told cooperating defendant to meet Mujica and to bring chains and weights and to help take care of it. Police say they saw Mujica get into a Chrysler Town & Country minivan driven the morning of January 7th. Officers say they followed the vehicle to a location in Minneapolis where Mujica got out and manipulated something behind the driver's seat. Then Ripley got into the vehicle and Mujica drove to St. Paul, charging documents said. Officers then initiated a traffic stop at Phelan Boulevard near the Edgerton Street Bridge, where officers arrested Mujica. At the time, Ripley's involvement was allegedly unclear and he was booked on a drug charge. Officers say they recovered Ripley's and Mujica's phones and a stolen Walther 9mm handgun behind the driver's seat of the van. Police say Mujica told them that he was sent by the cartel to make a collection for a drug debt in the area of the 700 block of Payne Avenue. At this point in the interview process, police say Mujica gave officers his phone to look through, which led them to locate a photo of a person who appeared to be chained or handcuffed. The photo was then sent to a Mexican phone number via WhatsApp, police say. 2:30 p.m. on January 7th, police breached the door to a shop located on Payne Avenue and requested the occupants to come out. That's when police say Barney, Holdall, and Johnson exited the building, the complaint states. Police say Barney was shoeless and had difficulty walking, with a handcuff still attached to his right wrist. Officers also noted that his hand was very swollen and said he appeared to be in a lot of pain. Barney was transported to a nearby hospital where he's later discovered that his bottom teeth were loose, likely sustained during the assault. Holdall and Johnson were arrested after exiting the building. Okay, so this is in Minnesota, right? Like, this stuff is happening everywhere. You have to be prepared in the sense of like this level of criminality escalating. And with the new directives coming from law enforcement and Homeland Security, these elements are going to be targeted, which means they might get sloppy or they might get desperate. And we know that desperate criminals or a cornered criminal ends up becoming more dangerous. And I just wanted to kind of give you some examples of cases that have happened just here recently around the country in other parts other than just border states or other than southern border states to remind you that no matter where you live, it's probably happening in some capacity. And that Zautuni case where all three of those, I believe to be brothers, were arrested, that, at least for me, was a demonstration of cartel-related criminal activity where no one talked about it being cartel related in the news report or from the police. So these are the red flags you got to look for. Large sums of cash, large sums of fentanyl, weapons, stolen vehicles, fraudulent documents, and possible interactions regarding bail and things of that nature. So this is where we're at. Keep an eye out for this Mexican false flag cartel attack, right? Don't forget, in the earlier part of this live stream, when we were talking about the fact that they are planning on having a shooter shoot at U.S. officials, government, military, or law enforcement officials from across the border, and then somehow implicating the Mexican government with that attack. That is something you should definitely be keeping an eye out for in the sense of like how that affects the current environment and the current atmosphere and everything else related to all the political movements we're currently witnessing. And for your personal, protection and personal awareness, now you know what kind of criminal stories to look for in your community that may have more to them. And so I would personally, if you were just kind of like wondering about what level of action or criminality might be occurring in your area, start looking for news reports regarding fentanyl, because that will definitely lead you somewhere usually. But obviously someone being arrested for possession of fentanyl doesn't actually always provide you with like the big fish. But these are things that you can start to look out for to get an idea of what's happening in your community and what level of escalation might be anticipated, right? So you guys are amazing. Now, I do want to say, If you want to be part of the private live stream tonight, you can hit the join button down below, become a channel member, and every Monday after this live stream, I do a private live stream to thank channel members as well as Subscribe Star members. Now, if you want to be a Subscribe Star member, that is $5 a month, but it is a way to support the channel directly, which some people like to do, and I appreciate them doing that. And so the private live stream is open to them as well as some exclusive content. And I am working on some new projects in the sense of product development and things of that nature this year. And so Subscribe Star members will have exclusive access to anything in the sense of like a pre-release or any R&D or product testing. Those people will have first dibs in the sense of being selected for helping me out with possible feedback or things like that in the future, which is something that I am currently working on. So I just want to make you aware of that. And hopefully the things that I'm trying to develop are useful for this community. I have a couple of things I want to just throw out there for you, but some of the actual like hard products that I'm trying to design are made in the USA and will be likely at least at some level in an affordable price point bracket that people would be able to justify a purchase with. So these are things that I'm trying to put together. It's not easy. I'm not a product developer. I'm not an engineer. And so things are, let's just say, moving at the pace that they're going to move at, because that's just where I have to work from. But is there stuff I'm trying to do, and I just hope that I can provide more services and more support to this community as a whole because of what it's given to me, which I'm greatly appreciative of. So thank you, Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival. Good to see you. I always appreciate you being here. And yeah, we might have to do an interview one day. I think that might be a good idea, and it might just get me out of my comfort zone, right? And come hang out and talk to some good people, out on the East Coast, which is originally where I'm from, if you count Florida. But regardless, you guys are all amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay aware, be prepared, and just stay alert. Don't operate from a standpoint of fear. Don't operate from a standpoint of panic. If you're just getting started with prepping right now, just slow down. Understand you don't have to do everything today, and always ensure your priorities are where they need to be: food and water, and obviously shelter. But backup power is going to be used in most emergencies more often and more likely than firepower, right? And so just be aware of that, but then remember that a lot of what I do on this channel is about firepower because I like it and it's cool. So you guys have a great night. I will see you next week, and that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.